So he's wearing many hats, and now today he's presenting on behalf of himself, Dr. Roger Hosein, and Dr. Bhoendradatt Tewarie. He's presenting Building Caribbean Human Capital Through Cost Sharing in Higher Education. Join me in welcoming him to the podium. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed, for the introduction, and all protocols observed. I'm going to talk briefly about the issue that we face in building human capital. And the reason that this came to our attention is that, it's a struggle throughout the entire region in how we go about financing. Did that just move? Financing higher education. So what we developed was essentially a sort of a theoretical framework that was in Dr. Hosein, Dr. Tewarie, and myself, and how we should treat with financing higher education. We know that it is provided at the level of the state, and listening to this morning's panel armchair discussion, we shared a similar view that there was an over-reliance on the state in providing tertiary level education. So we felt that beyond a certain level, it should be some type of input from the individuals themselves. So we raised a couple of questions, and we tried to develop the response to these questions and a theoretical framework, and then develop some type of outline for a type of a plan that may better suit our needs where human capital is concerned. Now, we acknowledge that tertiary level human capital is a critical factor in the growth and development process, especially from that sustainable level, in that the stock of knowledge is what is critical in accumulating for countries to become competitive, and it facilitates growth. There are numerous examples, and the literature is littered with a number of examples where human capital has provided that impetus for growth to take place. And so we figured that, yes, we acknowledge that, and we know that in the region that it's something that has been acknowledged as well. And this literature also points to countries ascribing importance to education based on budgetary allocations. That's a signal. And so within the region, when we look through the region, we saw that, yes, the signals are there, and the importance of tertiary level education in innovation. As a matter of fact, historically, we have always, the state has always undertaken some type of initiative to provide tertiary level education. And we felt that we looked specifically at the GATE program in Trinidad and Tobago, and one of the issues that came up was the level of inefficiencies that are created in the system by way of funding tertiary level education. Now, mind you, I keep saying it is a good initiative, but not necessarily a good outcome for us when we continue to mass produce and mass finance tertiary level education without some input by the individuals themselves as well as the private sector. And we answer that question in a different way. Now, what we realized, and we looked specifically zooming in on that 2004 period with the GATE program, and what we've realized is that this GATE program, it facilitated vertical inefficiencies. And you would see, I think you can see very clearly, you're looking at the graph with two regions, A and B. Well, the original income line, which would be that Y1, YD1, which is the one on the bottom, that is where we've considered that that is where we would start in terms of the income distribution in households. And so if we use that line as a reference point, and we use YUF as the regular rate at which an individual will access tertiary level education, now the income levels on the horizontal axis, it starts to your far left, would be the high income individuals, and to your far right, it would be the lower income individuals. So we see on that spectrum, if we were to assume that the cost of tertiary level education were at YUF, which would be YUF on the vertical axis, then the level of individuals accessing tertiary education would go up to HM. So from HM to HA, those individuals would not be able to access tertiary level education. That is without any type of subsidy. Now, when GATE was implemented and in the full way in which we know it in that tertiary level education for all, it meant that that would drastically reduce the cost of education, as well as push that income allocated to education for others in other areas. So that we would then see a shift from YD1 to YD2. But what happens is that the individuals that are being targeted, which would be the low-income individuals to the far right in region A, should be the ones who would be able to access tertiary level education. However, with GATE as we know it, individuals in both groups A and B, which would be, and in B we have the higher income earners, they're the ones also benefiting from GATE tuition. So this tells us that it's not addressing it in an efficient way in how we allocate the resources. So then came the revisions to GATE and the means test, but that created another problem within the system, as we saw it. Now, it did not even address the vertical inefficiencies, which we have identified here. So we acknowledge the larger proportion of students receiving tertiary the larger proportion of individuals receiving tertiary level funding are not those individuals who need it most in terms of income groups. So what that tells us is that there's a lot of wastage. So if we targeted low-income individuals, we would see A only being allocated, but instead we have A and B. So B can represent ideally what is misallocated. That 5 minutes gone already. So we have, but the question we asked is it sustainable in that form? It is not. It really isn't sustainable. The expenses keep going up and the inefficiencies keep mounting. Now, the question came back again. We revisited this in terms of who is accessing this funding, who is accessing, and we looked at the income distribution of those individuals. Now, the low-income individuals in the band, if we remember, it is $6,999 and below is income household per month. High middle income would be between $6,000 and $15,000. High income, I think, somewhere over 15 up and upward bound. So we noticed that those lower income individuals were not even accessing tertiary level education with GATE funding to a large extent, the really low income individuals. So it started from above the 6,000 mark, those individuals were more likely to access tertiary level education. So what in essence the revisions did is that it made the demand curve for tertiary level education shift to the left. So those individuals actually not shift to the left, sorry. If we look at D1, what happened with individuals now having with 10,000 and above having to pay 1/4 of their tuition, that would actually drive the cost of attendance for those individuals up and reduce the number of individuals accessing tertiary level education. So again, the model will not work in that current form, even with the revisions. It's still inefficiencies in the allocation. So we need to address on a broader scale the whole notion of tertiary level funding. Now, what we also realized is that most of the households, 70% of the households, based on the last household budgetary survey, earn less than $10,000. So even with the revision, we will still be back to where we have the vertical inefficiencies, where we would have all of those individuals as well. So the question is, now we know things have to change. So the question becomes, we asked, who should actually be paying? Should the state even be funding tertiary level education? I know we also, but we are saying that there can be a deployment of different mechanisms. But to answer the question of who should pay for it, we try to look at who benefits first. And let me point your attention to this particular table, which tells us where the rate of return on education lies. And we have it at the social level, and we have it at the private level. The rate of return at the private level is substantially higher than the rate of return at the social level, which tells us that the individuals benefit a lot more from tertiary level education than the society. We benefit from positive externalities. It is the direct benefit for individuals is increases in income and improvements in their lifestyles. So we noticed that, and this led to some additional research, which we're looking at some sort of Manserian wage function, and we're looking also at possibly, limitations is data, of course, possibly looking at the return on the investment in education by dollar amount. But save and accept, it's higher at the private level, so why not have the individual bear the cost? Now, who should pay for it? And the question is, if the tertiary level is funded from general taxpayers' dollars, it's regressive. And Garrisman in 2016 indicated, and as we have seen in the vertical inefficiencies, that tertiary level education funded from taxpayers' dollars is regressive in that mainly the wealthy benefit from that type of tax. As a matter of fact, Moretti indicated a 1% increase in the proportion of college-educated workers raises the wage of high school dropouts and high school graduates, workers with some college and college graduates. So in essence, we need to be very, very careful about who should be paying for this thing because, again, the society, there are no significant gains for them. And an additional year of schooling is associated with a 30% higher GDP, but only a 10% higher increase, 10% increase in wages. So what we're seeing is that there's some discrepancies in the research that is out there in essence in terms of where the return lies, but most of it points to a social level being much lower than the private level. So we figured that we would look again at who are the beneficiaries. Now, when we looked closer at the individual, we saw that the individual factored in a net wage premium, a net employability premium, and a pension premium. So the individual, again, stands to benefit more from tertiary level education. And we had those individuals with higher levels of tertiary of education, which would be the tertiary level, benefiting more from that employability premium, more from the net wage premium, and the pension premium as well. So we figured that it would be feasible to have a system that is deployed where the individuals make a payment, or it would be more sustainable actually if those individuals were to make a payment. So we looked at and we explored what we call the income contingent loan models. And what the income contingent loan models says is that upon completion, the cost of consumption is zero to the individual, but that individual will make a repayment based on a percentage of their lifetime incomes. Those with higher lifetime earnings that are at the end of the spectrum would be paying a little bit more. But what is important to note is that the payments would be so small that they would have some consumption smoothing effect as well. It's a very, very small percentage of the individual's incomes. But those payments would be sufficient to make the system more sustainable, in that those paying back into the system would be able to finance those who are entering the system rather than using taxpayers' dollars, which would not be the most effective way. I know every time I present this paper, I am mindful that I'm presenting it on the campus where we are the direct beneficiaries, but we have to be practical about the efficiencies that we're talking about within the system. I know my time is up, but we have proposed in the paper a theoretical model of how the income contingent loan system would work, and how it would work through the system in a country such as Trinidad and Tobago, and become a more sustainable way and a more participatory way to fund tertiary level education, wherein you would have contributions by the individual, the private sector, and lastly, the state at some level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Conrad.